Welcome to Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. This is our third series and part 3 of Ask Me a Question. Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm doing well, David. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks. And what's your first question?
Well, my first question is from Louise in Massachusetts.
All right.
And Louise asks, what is your favorite thing about performing? And do you prefer solo bass recitals, collaborations, or orchestral playing? And why? And it reminds me of the question that someone asked you once, do you prefer performing, teaching, or composing? It seems like whatever I'm doing in the moment, I really just
Yes.
I love. I love playing the bass. There it is. I put it out there. It's true. Um, when I'm sitting there in the middle of the Boston Symphony or the Boston Pops, 9.9 times out of 10, I'm like, this is amazing. I mean, yes, last weekend I played on Nantucket, an island right off the coast of Massachusetts, and I was playing in the most severe wind I've ever experienced in my life. The music stand wasn't staying up. My stand partner, poor Bebo, his name is Bebo, and he's a saint because he basically just held the music stand the whole concert. That moment, I might have thought, this isn't the most fun I've had in my life.
I'm presuming it was an outdoor concert.
What's that? Oh yeah, outdoors. I mean, this is on the beach. Like we literally have to walk through sand, all your
Right.
instruments, climb up a flight of stairs and stand on a or sit on a stage that they've erected for us. It's quite something. It's spectacular. You see this gorgeous sunset. It's beautiful. But I digress. That might have been not my most favorite concert moment ever. But I mean, I love playing solo recitals. It's new to me over the past, 4 or 5 years, but I am just in love with it and I want to do more and more. But then when you came here from England and you were in Boston with me for those 10 days and we collaborated, I thought, this is all I ever want to do for the rest of my life. This is great. We're just going to have to trap David and Sarah, keep them here, and we'll just play forever. So I think I'm so enthusiastic about the double bass and just love playing it so much that I'll do all of it.
I also think you find where you're supposed to be. And whatever your interest as a bass player, there's somewhere for you. The one thing I worked out very quickly, I'm not an orchestral player. I did a lot of orchestral playing when I was younger, and I just thought, this isn't for me. I had other things I prefer doing. And so I love solo recitals, collaborations. You and I work well together, and I've worked well with so many other bass players. Really enjoyed collaborating, and that I enjoy. And I like creating opportunities for my students and showing them what's possible. And then it's up to them, because I try and say, I want you to have a 60-year career. I want you to play the bass for the next 60 years. And it's up to you what you do with it. If you decide to go into orchestral playing, fantastic. Just be the best orchestral player you can be. If you decide to do that and teach and solo play and chamber music, fantastic. If you decide just to do orchestral playing, that's fantastic as well. There's a place for all of us. And I really enjoy that.
There is. And I always tell my students, I want them to be successful, but to me, success is maybe different than what they're used to hearing. I don't need them to be rich and famous or principal of a major orchestra or the most famous soloist in the world. I want them to wake up happy. I want them every day when they get out of bed in the morning to think, I am doing what I love and I am so happy. And it may change over time. It may not. I have one former student now, and he wants to be in an opera orchestra. He loves opera and he loves playing it. Personally, that's not my jam. I like listening to it and all, but I find playing it to be like very tedious, boring pages and then one page of complete disastrous scariness. And then it's all whole notes again. But, he loves it. And I just want my students to find their place and find happiness. And that to me is success. So,
Exactly, exactly.
what is your first question for today?
But I've got one from Jan Cowell. Jan was one of my ex-students. So he was a fantastic bass player and composer. And he put, what is the most common mistakes that young composers make when writing for the bass? Now, what a nice question. And young composers, I think, write too many notes. I think sometimes they're too ambitious. As you get older, you realize you don't need so many notes. It's I think it's to do with age. I think when you're young, you're ambitious. I think someone once said when you're younger, does your heart beat faster? So therefore everything is quicker. Everything has got more energy. And years ago, I was asked to play a piece by a composer who's part of this composers group. And there was no fee. So I said, yeah, I'll be happy to do it if I can play one of my pieces in the concert. So they had to have 3 committee meetings so that I could play one of my pieces. And I turned up and I'd never heard so many notes in one concert. Millions of notes. Unbelievable. And then I went and played mine, so few notes. And it was just like chalk and cheese. And I just thought, right, I think I'm okay actually. It's interesting. It's so I would always say to I would say to young composers, write what you want. Because when you're young, you should experiment and try everything. And I think as you develop and grow older, you maybe write a fewer notes. I think you need to say what you want to say.
Yeah. But I think that's probably part of the learning process and the sort of maturing process.
It is. It is. It's. I've had many pieces written for me which are unplayable, and often it's from a position of enthusiasm. People want to test you, but sometimes they don't. It was being challenged, and it being impossible. And I've had both of those. Challenge we don't mind at all. If it works for the bass, that's great. It's just up to us to put the hard work in. But if it doesn't work for the bass,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's always.
or the other thing I would say as well is, if you're writing for the bass, is try and befriend a local bass player
Yes.
and write it out and ask them, and then you can see the distance because an interval on a piano is really quite small, but on an interval on a bass can be 18 inches. It's
Right.
completely different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think it's very different when it's a bass player writing.
Mm.
Sometimes the young bass players will be very enthusiastic, and I've had students at Berkeley bring pieces to me. They said, well, I can't play this myself yet, but I think you can. And so I'll play through and I'll say, well, I can. But I'm telling you that these couple little spots maybe need a little bit more editing.
Well,
But when it's a student who doesn't play bass, I used to go over to Harvard University a couple times a year, and I've done this at Berkeley a lot too. You play through the pieces they've written and you have to, it's their final presentation, but then after they want comments. And so I'll sort of talk to them about, find a bass player that you can befriend and let them try things. Sometimes you'll have me going from half position on the E string way high into thumb position with a quarter note at 160 and I'm playing 16th notes. I don't care how great you are. Can't do it. It's not going to work. It's going to sound like a low fart and a high squeak. And there may not be a lot of pitch to it. And, so we talk things through. But yeah, I think the advice of if you're not a bass player, befriend one. We're pretty nice people. So,
exactly. And we want to share our passion and enthusiasm for the bass, really.
Yes.
And what's your next question, Susan?
My next question is from the great Simone Garcia. He said, how do you approach a new work that you don't know and that there are no audio references for? I love this question. First of all, if there is an audio reference, I won't listen to it first, pretty much ever. I want to form my own opinion before I hear someone else telling me how it needs to go. So no matter whether there's recordings or not, I always do it the same way. I will do an initial super slow playthrough just to get an idea. Then I'll do maybe a playthrough of was that part hard or was it not? Let me check the tempo. Then I start marking things. I use an iPad so I can do this without any repercussions. I'll put a little X to the left of any line that has a tricky passage in it. And I like doing that on the iPad. When I do that on regular paper, when you erase the X, there is a ghost that remains on the page, and you'll never forget that that was a tricky passage. And then over the next few days, I will practice slowly. I call it etude style practicing. I'll practice as if it's an etude. I break it down. And, I might use rhythms or bowings or different techniques that I use to practice and just work it out. Figure out always, I say this to my students, you need to know the notes and the fingerings first. Because if you don't have that figured out, nothing's going to happen. And then I'll check my rhythms, make sure I've calculated those correctly. And then, bowings and other musical stuff, I lovingly call it. but I love to just break it down. And so I'm not always practicing the first measure first. I'm oftentimes jumping in several lines or a couple pages in, and I call them my KTSs, my known tricky spots. And I practice those first. And when those are no longer so tricky, they're now known spots. Well, that's good. That sounds pretty comfortable and easy. So that's how I do it, but it depends on how much time I have. Um, if I know I've got months to learn something, I'll only do 1 or 2 KTSs a day and then move on to other music. But I've got to learn it quickly, which oftentimes I do. I'll just do a whole bunch of them, and it's a whole day of what might feel like etude style practicing, but I love that. And it's very focused and detailed work. And I always tell my students, and as I do this with myself, you can't get down on yourself. I'll have students that come in and they'll be like, I stink, only they don't use the word stink. I'm so terrible. And I'll say, no, you've got to be clinical about this. If a surgeon comes in to perform surgery and he makes his first incision and then he goes, oh, that's terrible. That is not going to be a good surgery. So you just come in and you say, okay, don't say you stink. What was hard? What didn't sound good? Identify the spot where things derailed and fix it. And no assessment of you as a person, not even an assessment of you as a bass player. You give yourself the grace to learn. So that's a very long-winded answer, I know, but
I would agree. I'm saying there's really lots of really interesting things there. The one thing I've always taught, I call it structure, and it's exactly what you said, bowings and fingerings. They may change because as you play the things change, but you have to have something on paper. If you have a fingering, then you can practice it. And if it's the right fingering, it gets better. And if it's the wrong fingering, it doesn't get better. So therefore, you have to rethink it. It's not rocket science, any of this one. And most of the music I play nowadays there are no recordings.
Right, too.
But the more you play it, the more it starts to talk to you, the more it sings to you. And you just have to listen. So yeah, this is the nice thing about teaching students is you can teach them to open their ears to listen to what's going on. And your interpretation will be different to mine. And they're both completely valid. And that's the nice thing. It's the same notes and same bowings, but we have it in a different way. So I don't often listen to other recordings. I like working out my own interpretation. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think I think for students it's a really good thing because you have to take ownership of that piece. And then if it is your performance, if it's your interpretation, it will be far better than if it's a copied my interpretation or somebody else's interpretation.
Yeah.
So it's a nice question. I like that one.
Yeah, yeah. And you said something just quickly that I say to my students too. I word it slightly differently. I said, God invented the pencil for a reason. Don't spend tomorrow figuring out what you already figured out today. But use a pencil because your fingerings and your bones might change. It's very likely that something will change. And so then you can use that handy dandy eraser and fix it, but at least have something written down. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every day.
I do it a lot. It's editing, and sometimes a composer will send a biography, and then I'll edit it before we publish the piece. And I've realized that editing is far easier than writing. Writing is the difficult one, and the editing is writing the fingerings down first, and then editing is when you change it. This is where it becomes the proper fingering, the maybe the best fingering. Because there are lots of different possibilities. But I enjoy the challenge of learning new music.
Me too. I love it.
Mm.
All right. What's your next question?
Mine is from my great friend Adam Booker, and he said, "Yeah, he's great. He came to England. We did concerts together. He's such a great musician, great player, and such nice company. We first met in Prague, I think. I think in 2016. We've been friends ever since." And he said, "How did you get into the publishing business, and how do you balance that with teaching and performing?" And when I was at school, I started playing the bass when I was 14, and I started taking exams. And the exam board produced a syllabus of all the pieces which you could choose for each level. And York edition had just started a few years before. and they were dominating the syllabus. So for every grade, most pieces would be from York edition. So I started buying these publications, and I started reading. The Rodney Slafford had commissioned new pieces, and then I saw Bert Turetsky had, and then I learned about the Paris Conservatoire. And so even at school, I decided I wanted to start a publishing company for the bass, and I had no idea how to do it. And then in 1986, I went to Prague to study with František Pošta and came home with lots of Czech music, which wasn't available here. And that's why we started. And a friend of mine was a publisher as well. So I just contacted him, John Bishop, and I said, John, how do I do this? And he said, well, you need to have a typeset. But in those days, it was, have you heard of Letraset? Do you have Letraset in America?
I think so.
It's where it's on it's like a transfer, and it's on a sheet, and you rub it, and then it transfers onto the sheet.
Okay.
Well, there's one for music called Notaset, and we used to have that done, but it's really expensive. So that's how we started. And then for a long time, not much happened, and then eventually things took off. So that's how I got into the publishing business. And how do I balance that with teaching and performing? Every weekday, month are different. Sometimes there's more performing, so I have less time for teaching and publishing. So sometimes I'm doing more teaching, so I have less time. It's all the time I balance. I'm balancing what I'm doing, but I can always find time for publishing. If I'm up at 6 a.m, then I might do an hour, and then I'm out all day teaching or play or whatever I'm doing. But I've done at least an hour towards a new publication.
I know when you were here in Boston in April, in the mornings, I'd come pick you guys up at the hotel and you're like, oh, yep, I've already, edited this or typeset this or started writing this. And you do it, you just,
There's always,
you're like me.
on tour, there's always a lot of downtime, and I enjoy the downtime because I use the time well, and I bought lots of pieces to proofread. It's a job I don't like, so I always take proofreading with me. And also that's when I wrote the 12 piece of bass rates, the quartets for open strings and bass percussion. I did that in Boston, which was so nice. So I use my time well. I think I'm I don't think I'm a hard worker, and I don't think I'm really busy. I think I just use my time well.
I think you're a hard worker, but that you're humble about it. But you definitely use your time well.
Well, I would say it's not work, is it really, when I do it? I think we're very lucky to earn money for doing what we enjoy doing.
Yes,
Uh, yeah.
absolutely.
But thank you to Adam for that one. So what's your next question, Susan?
I received one from an anonymous person. They weren't anonymous to me, but they asked me to remain anonymous.
Right.
Why is it so important to warm up? Don't you play every day anyhow? That's a question that I actually get a lot too. It's really important to warm up because you want to make sure that your muscles and your body are warm and not stiff and tight when you start playing. And I think this summer is a great example of that. So we just got through the Olympics, which I just love watching. I mean, I sit there sitting on my couch eating ice cream saying, oh, look at that gymnast. She did not stick that landing. Meanwhile, I'm excited when I get up and walk across the room without tripping. But you take someone like Simone Biles, who's won so many Olympic medals, so many competition medals. You don't see her rolling out of bed and jumping on the balance beam. Right? You're going to get injured. You're using a lot of muscles in your body. And these I call them kids. I mean, they're human beings, but to me they're kids. These kids put their bodies through so much, but think about our instrument. It's so big, it's so tall. It takes strength and smarts to play it without hurting your body. And I think if you go into it with cold muscles and without, your arms and legs kind of being up and ready for a little bit, you can get hurt. And it's really funny because there are days, especially in December when I'm playing with the Boston Pops, on the weekends, we do 3 concerts in a day. And, you get home at 11 at night and you're back at the hall at 10 the next morning. Do I need to warm up? Don't I still feel warmed up from yesterday? Well, I mean, in my head, I do. But when I go to play the bass, I want a few minutes. And it doesn't take long to warm up well, but you can do it in about 5 minutes. But I just want a few minutes to reset. Also, any sort of bad habits. I call it survival habits that you may have sort of fallen into from the day before. It's a nice, good way to reset, clean slate for the new day. And as David, as you know, I'm a huge fan of warming up. I even published a book of warm ups because I just think it's so important. And, I've never been injured, nor have you, from playing the bass. I say to my students, I walk into walls, I hit my hands on door casings, I trip. I mean, I am a hot mess. And I hurt myself regularly. I have bruises on my arms and legs regularly where I think, I don't know where that came from. But when it comes to the bass, I've, knock on wood, never hurt myself. It is just, I'm positive it's because I warm up every day. Everyone that I know that's been injured, well, not every single person, because I haven't asked them all, but most of the people that I've talked to, they were like, oh, well, I've never warmed up. And I'm thinking, well, that's why I have tendonitis right there, And I know that you like to play a few notes to warm up before you
I
get
I
started.
think I warm up without calling it warming up.
Yeah.
I'll always play open strings, and I play open 1, 2, 4, and sixes. The exercise I give my students, and when I practice at home, that's how I start practicing. And before I play, I'll always be playing. The thing I find is I need to get my sound from the bass.
Yes.
And sometimes it isn't always there. Sometimes you have to warm the bass up or warm you up, whatever it is. And once my sound is there, then it's okay. It's whatever it is. But I think I warm up with, as I say, without calling it warming up.
Right. You
It's
don't make a big production out of it.
no, and I've always done these hand shapes, half position, first position, second position, um, and it's yeah, I enjoy doing them with my students. My students do them all the time, so they're progressing into to positions that maybe they don't play yet, but it's not so difficult. You're just moving a half step each time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I like that question. That's a really nice question.
Yeah, that is a good one. All right, what's your next one?
Mine is from James Rippingale, who is a guitarist friend of mine, really great composer, really great composer. And he said, I struggle so much to complete compositions and let go of them. How do you do this? How do you know when enough is enough? And again, a really good question. Yeah, how do you know? How do you know when it's finished? And what I do is I write the piece and then I revise and revise and revise. I play through it and play through it, play through, change, and then at some point, that's it. And I know that's the best I can do, and I can't improve on it. It is what it is, and then I'm happy to let it go. And usually I don't change things. Usually I don't go back and change it. I used to work with Tony Osborne, the great composer. And Tony was amazing. He never revised anything. And I used to say, Tony, I think maybe this is a bit too long, maybe too many repetitions. Oh yeah, okay, I'll do that. And then Teppo Hauta-Aho from Finland, he would never stop revising. And I used to say, the piece you wrote 20 years ago, Teppo, is what you wanted to say 20 years ago. And of course you've changed, but you can't make that piece into today. You said what you wanted to say. So it was interesting. So I know when I send a piece to you, it's the best I can do at the time. I can look later and think, yeah, maybe I could have done that better. But I know at the time, that's it. So it is difficult. And I say to students, when is the Mona Lisa finished? At some point, you have to let go of it. At some point, that's it. Because an artist will always they just keep touching up this painting. And yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And I would think, I mean, I don't write very well, but yeah, it is, when do you just let it go and say it's done? And, I think it's your creation. You want it to be as best as it can be. But then I also feel once you've decided it's done, that should be it. You can't, like you said to Teppo, 20 years later, you shouldn't revise it. It was where you were 20 years ago. It was honest to the moment.
It's so true. It's interesting, but I revise and revise and edit. Um, and as I say, it's very rare that I come back to a piece. Although I did with the Kuzovitsky piece for you, I changed a few things. I'm not sure I made it any better when I look back.
I liked what you did with it. I really did. It felt more balanced. But the first way was great. But also, I had done a little recording of it at Tanglewood, but it hadn't had its world premiere in front of an audience yet. So it was still, I think, within the realm of tweaking, you know, was okay.
It's interesting as a composer, because I know James, he never writes anything down. All his music's in his head, so he's playing all his own pieces, and they're brilliant. He's a fantastic guitarist, fantastic composer, but he's completely different to me. I'm really confident because I'm not saying it's a good piece. I'm saying I know it's the best I can do.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm always partial to your music anyway. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah. Do you think we have time for a couple more?
We have. What's your next question?
All right, my next question is how much and how often do you practice? And that was also sent from Gina in Massachusetts.
Well, that's nice.
And I love that question. I'm going to backfill. I'm going to start with the sometimes I don't practice. Sometimes I took a vacation in June and I didn't touch my bass for 10 days because I was away and I didn't want to bring it with me. And I don't think I'd been away from my bass for that long, maybe ever. Um, and when I was a student, if I did like a big intense festival for a summer, my teacher would say, take a week or two off before you go to school because you're physically, mentally, and emotionally going to be tired. I tell my students take a day off every week, and it's a great time to study, to listen to recordings, to look at scores, to go to the movies, take a walk, get away from the physical demands of the instrument. I don't think that's a bad thing. But I would lie if I said I practiced every single day, but I would say I practiced almost every single day. Every even then, as an adult, sort of life things happen and you can't for random reason. But I also know that when I'm not physically practicing, I'm still problem solving in my mind with the music that I'm working on. And how much? I mean, in a perfect world, 3 or 4 hours a day. Do I get that every day? No, but I'm an extremely efficient practicer. I want to get done and I want to teach my students to be able to do in an hour what your average person will do in 3 hours. So if I practice 2 or 3 hours, it should have the same efficacy as 6 hours of practicing or 9 hours of practicing. I don't think it's about the amount of time unless you're like practicing for 10 minutes, then it's about time. But if you're practicing smart and efficient, I think you can get a lot done in an hour. Well, then that begs the question of what do you need to get done? What else, what else is on your stand or your checklist of things you need to and then want to get done? So, and I after our tour, David, well, I went straight into a week of symphony and then a whole bunch of Boston pop stuff. Those days I was doing what I call survival practicing. It was just practicing for the gigs to make sure that I could play the gigs the way I wanted to. I said to my husband one day, I said, geez, I haven't practiced since our tour. And he looked at me and said, you're practicing your music for your gigs and you're gigging every day. I said, oh, right. But I also think when you're practicing, you have to keep in mind, do I have a rehearsal and or a concert today? I want to make sure I save strength and energy for that. So I don't know. How about you?
I enjoy practicing. I don't practice every day now, although the times when I do. Two of my ex-students have just been to Aspen for 6 weeks, and they've had 6 weeks of practicing in concerts. And I was so envious. I thought, wow, it's such a fantastic place. And so I decided to take 3 days of just practicing, nothing else. So I booked a hall, and on the first day I did 5 hours, and then I did 4 hours and 4 hours. So over 3 days, I did 13 hours. But as you say, our 13 hours is maybe 26 hours because we know how to practice, what to practice. And I absolutely loved it. And I thought that's my mini Aspen over 3 days in Somerset, which was really nice. And I thought every month I'm going to maybe take 3 days off and just practice. I found with 5 hours, I found the fifth hour it was hard work because the bass is so physical, and I'm really old now. And yes, I am. I'm so old. And
Ancient.
thank you very much. And so I thought 4 hours a day is manageable. And I thought that I can do that. So I'm going to do that, I think, start of every month.
I
And
love that.
it's a nice way of doing it. So it's just for me. And I've gone back to my study books. So I really enjoy all this one. So yeah, practicing,
I love
I,
that.
I haven't lost my love of it yet.
Right. Well, I haven't lost your love of the bass, so.
No. And I've just got one final question, which is from Dima Domowski, who is from Macedonia. He was one of my students in
Oh,
Wales. We've stayed friends for 20 odd years. He's now a bassist in the Zagreb Philharmonic Orchestra in Croatia. And he said, what drives or inspires you to be so active in commissioning and performing all these new pieces from composers around the world? That was simply growing up and just playing transcriptions. Because in the 1970s, there wasn't much repertoire available, or if it was difficult to get hold of. And there was a real reliance on transcriptions. And I have no problems with transcriptions. I think they're fantastic. And I do think transcriptions are why the bass has progressed so much, really, if I think about it. But I also felt we should have our own repertoire as well. And I was inspired by people like Rodney Slatford and Bert Turetsky and my teacher, Bronwyn Nash, František Pošta, all the people who commission new music. So if every bass player in the world today commissions 3 pieces in their lifetime, we'll have, I don't know, 300,000 more pieces. I don't know how many. So I like the idea of keeping the transcriptions because they're work, keeping the original repertoire because it's standard repertoire, but also adding to it as well. So we have our own thing as well. And I just started, when I started when I was at music college, and I just started asking composers, if it said they're a composer, I used to say, have you written for bass? And the answer was invariably no. You want to write for bass? And then I used to just strong arm them and just bend their arm behind their back until they said yes, obviously. And then we were away, really. It's just, yeah, no, the other one was, would you like to write a piece for no fee? That was the other one. Because I'd never used that
fun one.
running. So that was the reason why I did it. And I've enjoyed it. And we're up to about, I think, well over 750 pieces now.
It's amazing.
Which is nice.
What an impact that has made on the bass community, though. Just this great music coming to us, thanks to you, really.
But it's thanks to all of us. It's so many people have been part of this. I'm just one tiny cog in this enormous wheel, but I enjoy doing it. I really like it, and hopefully I give people permission almost to, they can do it. It is possible. Just ask the composer. They'll either say yes or no, and they'll either say they want $10,000 for it, or no, I'll write it for you for nothing because I want to write it for you.
Right.
So it's and if you can offer performances, then they're more likely to write.
Right. Yes, absolutely. It's exciting.
It's a nice question.
I think we've had a lot of fabulous questions, and I have to tell you that I was excited and grateful that so many people had so many questions. We made 3 episodes of this, and thank you to everybody for the questions. It's exciting, and
I think there'll be a 4th episode as well, because
I think there will be.
I got some more here. So.
Good. Oh, good. I love this. Well, thank you everybody for listening to season 3 of Bass Talk with Hagen and Hayes. This is our 3rd Ask Me a Question episode, and this is so much fun. Please like and subscribe, and thank you to our sponsors, Leatherwood Rosin and GraceGalleryDesign.net. We look forward to talking to you again soon.